Worst Jobs of the War, Vietnam Edition. The Vietnam War lasted for decades, with the North Vietnamese engaging South Vietnam, the United States, and other allies in a protracted guerrilla war. The fighting raged across jungles, in the air, and even underground, as both sides vied for supremacy. During this drawn-out conflict, some of those who fought there found themselves in situations that were more deadly, more terrifying, or just plain more unpleasant than soldiers that were fighting elsewhere. The tunnel rat and tunnel warfare. The lightly armed forces of the Viet Cong were unable to match the firepower that the Americans had at their disposal, and so adopted a guerrilla style of warfare, striking at vulnerable targets before melting back into the jungle again without a trace. It was soon discovered that the VC and NVA had made extensive use of underground tunnels, some of which were so substantial that they covered entire districts. Large forces could be moved to and fro underground completely undetected. These subterranean complexes featured living quarters, medical facilities, supply depots, kitchens, and other spaces to make life underground more bearable, though conditions were still pretty miserable. The air was stagnant, food would rot quickly in the moist conditions, and there were constant plagues of mice, spiders, snakes, and other pests that made the tunnels their home. Bodies would often be recovered from the battlefield and hidden underground to deny the Americans an accurate body count, and leaving a putrid stench in the air as the corpses rotted in the moist soil. The tunnels were shrouded in darkness, illumination provided by candles or occasionally electric lighting powered by bicycle dynamos. When American forces first discovered the tunnel complexes, they were just too numerous to simply collapse, as there could be multiple entrances miles apart, and anyway, the intel found within them was too valuable to simply just destroy. This is when a specialist unit was formed and trained to deal with this new threat, referred to as tunnel rats. Armed with a .45 pistol, a flashlight, and incredible courage, these men engaged the enemy in the confines under the earth. Usually men of smaller stature, the tunnel rats would crawl through the dark and claustrophobic spaces on one-man seek-and-destroy missions. The dangers were numerous and ever-present. Punji stakes and tripwires attached to grenades or other explosive devices littered the spaces at random intervals. The VC would wait patiently around a tight corner with a knife or bayonet or even a garrote, ready to strike or strangle an unwary rat groping through the darkness. Missions could last for hours, which primarily involved gathering intelligence and sabotaging any supplies found before returning to the surface. Combat in these confined spaces was brutal, the fighters often foregoing firearms in favor of knives and bayonets in the dim conditions. After their missions were completed, the tunnel rats would leave the tunnels with captured documents, weapons, and sometimes even prisoners. The men would often whistle Dixie before emerging, making their presence as an American known, as a small mud-caked figure exiting the subterranean gloom could easily be mistaken for an enemy.
World of Tanks presents new commanders, including Arnold Schwarzenegger.
You have to go through me.
Try out our special code Tankmania to get Excelsior, 250k in credits, and 7-day premium access. Get 3 free rental tanks for 10 battles each, including the Tiger 131, the Cromwell B, and the T-34-85M. Now this code is only for new players who register for the first time in the Wargaming portal. With World of Tanks, you can have massive battles, pick from a huge tank arsenal, and reenact historical tank encounters with your friends. Click the link in the description below and use our Tankmania code today to join the fray, soldier. Come play the Holiday Ops event, now also on mobile and console.
Viet Cong infiltrators. By 1968, it became clear to the Viet Cong that there could be no victory against the overwhelming might of the United States in a direct military conflict. Their aim was to take advantage of the growing unpopularity of the war, which was brewing up in the United States, and scoring a political victory instead. To achieve this, the VC came up with a bold plan: one that would shake the confidence of the American and South Vietnamese war effort. Called the Tet Offensive, as it coincided with the celebration of the holiday of Tet, or Lunar New Year, a time when hostilities traditionally slackened. Intelligence had reported a buildup of VC and NVA forces for months, but no one knew the size or scale of the operation. Then, on January 30th, 1968, they were unleashed. 84,000 communist fighters descended on hundreds of targets around South Vietnam, from the ancient city of Hue to outposts like Khe Sanh. The bulk of the attention, however, was directed at the capital city of Saigon, and most importantly, the American embassy itself. Early in the morning on January 31st, 19 VC sappers of the C-10 battalion launched an attack on the embassy. Though caught off guard, the military police stationed there engaged in a firefight with the infiltrators and managed to close the main gate. Undeterred, the VC blasted a hole in the outer wall of the compound with a satchel charge and stormed in, but their leaders were soon killed and their attack lost momentum. 2 RPGs were fired, wounding a Marine and blasting the seal of the United States off the wall, but otherwise caused no damage. The infiltrators exchanged gunfire with the embassy guards until U.S. reinforcements arrived, and the remaining attackers were then either killed or captured, though it took almost 6 hours after the initial attack for the embassy grounds to be declared secure. In pure military terms, the assault on the embassy, much like the rest of the Tet Offensive, was a disaster. The attacks were repulsed and the Viet Cong suffered titanic casualties, from which they would never fully recover. But that wasn't the point. The grounds of the embassy had barely been declared secure when an army of press reporters swarmed over the grounds, taking video and photographic evidence of what had transpired there. Images were sent back to America of dead enemy soldiers laying within yards of the main building, of bloodied American officials wounded in the attack, the smoke and debris-strewn courtyard that was once a symbol of American presence in the region, so blatantly violated. The burgeoning anti-war movement gained strength, and the war was seen as unwinnable. The infiltrators who attacked the embassy and other targets knew they were being sent on a suicide mission, but did so anyway, knowing that their sacrifice would ultimately lead to victory for their side. The Agent Orange Sprayer. The dense jungles of Southeast Asia provided the perfect terrain for lightly armed NVA and Viet Cong forces to conduct their guerrilla war against the ponderous American military. Frustrated at the enemy's ability to melt into the jungle and disappear without a trace, American military planners made the decision to utilize the chemical defoliant, Agent Orange, which became one of the most controversial acts of the war. Other methods of clearing the forests of Vietnam were tried, including using napalm to create fires, but the wet conditions prevented self-sustaining fires from spreading, and bulldozing or bombing sections of the jungle. But these were time-consuming and expensive. Some other chemical defoliants were tried, such as Agents White and Purple, but none were more extensively used as Agent Orange. This could be sprayed manually on the ground, but most often was deployed by aircraft, usually C-123 Provider cargo planes outfitted with special booms to dispense the chemical. In order to ensure that the defoliant was concentrated enough, the large planes had to fly low to the ground, which made them vulnerable to ground fire. Often, the aircraft would fly with an escort of F-4 Phantoms who would engage the enemy while the liquid was dispensed. Use of the defoliant became contentious right from the beginning. The Geneva Convention forbids the use of chemical weapons in warfare, but the U.S. government disagreed, as the Agent Orange would be used against vegetation, not humans, and the chemical had already been used domestically to control plant growth. Over the course of the war, over 19 million gallons of Agent Orange were spread over 6 million acres of land in Southeast Asia, causing devastating environmental damage and killing off all plant life that was exposed to it. Most concerning, however, was the toll on human health, as Agent Orange contains dioxin, a byproduct of the manufacturing process, and even during the war, lab tests among mice showed an increase in birth defects, miscarriages, and stillborns. Dioxin is also a known carcinogenic, and the levels of dioxin found in the herbicides used in Vietnam contain twice the amount used domestically. Agent Orange can also contaminate the ground it was sprayed on for years afterwards, leaching into the soil and accumulating in the bodies of people living in the region, passing on its effects to future generations. It is claimed that up to 2 million Vietnamese suffer from the after effects of Agent Orange, though this is disputed. In the years after the war, there have been numerous studies about the short and long-term effects of Agent Orange exposure, which have been subject to controversy. It's unclear if the medical conditions of those exposed to Agent Orange are caused by the herbicide or lifestyle and other factors. Still, without admitting liability, several companies that manufactured Agent Orange paid out a $180 million settlement in 1984 to veterans claiming medical issues due to the defoliant. Number 4. The Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol. Intelligence gathering is one of the most important yet often overlooked aspects of any conflict. Throughout the Vietnam War, American planners and strategists need a constant supply of information on the VC's and NVA's activities in order to counter their threat. One of the ways this was done was through the use of long-range reconnaissance patrols, or LRRPs. Known as LRRPs, these patrols consisted of small teams whose mission was to infiltrate deep into enemy territory. Their primary mission was intelligence gathering, making note of the location and movement of the enemy, which was usually along well-established trails. They would also engage in prisoner snatch operations for interrogation, as well as ambushing small detachments of enemy forces. After a successful engagement, they would gather weapons and any documents found before making their way to the extraction site. The missions carried out by the LRRP were both difficult and dangerous. Due to the nature of their task, the number of men was limited, usually around 6, and had limited firepower, relying on stealth and ingenuity to carry out their assignments. As deep as they were inside enemy territory, even the slightest noise could alert the enemy of their position, so they would forego the cumbersome protective gear like flak jackets and steel helmets issued to other troops, replacing them with soft flop hats and fatigues. Disturbed foliage, leaving footprints and other markings could lead to discovery. If found, 6 lightly armed men would have to hold off much greater numbers of enemy soldiers until help could arrive. The LRRPs would often operate outside of the envelope of friendly artillery fire bases, meaning the only support would be from hastily scrambled aircraft, which could be several minutes away, a lifetime on the battlefield. They were almost always greatly outnumbered. If a medevac was needed, it was almost always under enemy fire, which would have to be suppressed before the chopper could land and evacuate the wounded. It took a special kind of man to participate in this type of work. Self-reliant types who thrived on danger and were willing to operate in small, self-sufficient groups far away from security and safety. The war in Vietnam was a conflict known for its brutal nature. Whether fought in the jungle, in the air, or underground, there were some jobs that were more dangerous or just more miserable for those that had to endure them. In spite of the circumstances, these tasks were carried out with bravery, determination, and grit.